on a momentous day. Drop it. All right, we've got a power panel on a day that I would argue ended the Trump presidency. I'm there, I'm already there.
Yeah.
Okay.
He's just eager to win the bet we made last night on the post game.
Well, that was the quickest bet I ever won. Okay, so we will explain. It's the first story up in a second, but first, Jules Suzdaltsev.
You get it every time, and I don't understand how.
Brooke Thomas, John Iadarola. My name is Cenk Uygur. We got a show for you guys tonight, okay? It's amazing. From the very first story to the very last story, the last story is, it's just the most amazing conspiracy you've ever heard in your life. You will not be able to believe it, but people do. People do. It's amazing. It's amazing. So don't miss the end of the show either. Of course, you get the whole show at tyt.com/join. Become a member, support independent media, and get all of our programming. But first, we start with the end of the Trump presidency. John.
Am I supposed to leave like a spot where you can Okay, well, we'll
no,
see.
I don't have the soundboard with me.
Oh, okay.
So when he actually goes down, don't worry, the soundboard will be here.
Well, we'll see. Okay. This week just keeps getting worse for Donald Trump, with another of his highest profile associates flipping on him, as he likes to say, perhaps the highest of all. This is Alan Weisselberg, Chief Financial Officer for the Trump Organization. You might have heard of it. It's affiliated with Donald Trump. Was one of the executives who helped arrange $420,000 in payments to Donald Trump's longtime attorney, Michael Cohen, to help reimburse him for hush money he paid to an adult film star. Weisselberg is also one of 2 trustees of the trust that controls the president's assets. The other, to give you context, is Donald Trump Jr. So this guy and Donald Trump's son, the one that he likes a little, those are the 2 people that control all of those assets. So this guy is about as high placed as you could possibly be. Yeah, he was granted immunity by federal investigators in New York in exchange for his truthful testimony about his roles in those payments. So that was the big breaking news this morning.
Indeed, this is as big a news as you can imagine. First of all, let me begin by screaming, Weisselberg, straight ahead. Okay, last voyage of the USS Trumptanic. Okay, that's the guy who keeps Donald Trump's books. He doesn't keep Donald Trump's books on just Stormy Daniels or other payments to mistresses. He keeps all of his books. He has been with Donald Trump, though, to be fair, only since the 1970s. He has all of his books, all of them. So now let's break down what this immunity deal means. The immunity means I need immunity because I have committed a crime. Second thing that it means is prosecutors ask you ahead of time, what is the evidence you're going to give us to see if we will give you immunity. They don't take it on blind faith. They ask you, what do you have? And if it's good enough, they give you immunity for your crime breaking, that you are law breaking that you are admitting to. So prosecutors looked at the evidence and said, good enough. And they gave him immunity. He already testified apparently earlier in the year. Yeah. That, by the way, might be the reason Cohen has already pled guilty and is cooperating with prosecutors. It might be the reason David Pecker, who runs National Enquirer, is now cooperating.
And has immunity.
And has immunity. The rats have begun to leave the ship. Not begun, they've left the ship entirely. In the core group of Donald Trump, the only people remaining basically are his family members. Now the political rats haven't quite figured it out yet. Washington hasn't quite figured it out yet. They're like, oh, this is a very interesting story about an accountant or something like that. And it's in regards to hush money about Stormy Daniels. No, they have the books. The guy's a lifelong criminal. You could say, oh, Jack, you don't, oh, man, wait a minute, that's some assumptions. Same thing they said when I said Mark Sanford was not on the Appalachian Trail, okay? There was no way he was on the Appalachian Trail. Well, you don't know that, blah, blah, blah. No, okay, we'll find out, but you're telling me a guy, by the way, the crime that most likely Weisselberg committed, and hence why he needed immunity, was falsifying financial records. A guy who claims he has $10 billion, who has nowhere near $10 billion, who has all those shady financial dealings in his past, he didn't participate in falsifying any financial records? Come on. It's over. I'm ready for the countdown. You guys have it? Okay, let's do the countdown. It's a count up, actually, to the end of the Trump presidency, because it's already over. It's just a matter of when he actually leaves office. So it's day one. It's a tiny one. Tiny little tracker.
It'll get bigger as we get closer.
Okay. Anyway, it's so tiny I can't find it.
Hey, it's blocking half the screen. Can we shrink that thing a little bit? Jesus.
Day one, I'm ready to take bets on how long it'll take, but it won't take long.
It's gonna take a while.
You're there.
Oh, it's done.
Yeah.
You too.
This is the guy who has, not only does he know where all the bodies are buried, but he buried like half of them under the direction of Donald Trump. So this is, I tweeted out today a link to the story, and it's over.
I did the same exact thing. So we're apparently on the same track. Look, to talk about, wait, but Jules understated it. He doesn't know where half the bodies are buried. He knows where all of the bodies are buried, because if you remember the story about Donald Trump using his dad's accountant, basically the person who kept the books before Weisselberg, who's the chief financial officer of Trump Organization, the accountant said, oh, Donald would barely pay attention in the meetings. Ivana, on the other hand, his first wife, was smart. Okay, and then they asked him about his father. He's like, no, his father was a good businessman. Okay, and he's trying to help Trump. So Trump cannot do his own books. He's simply not nearly intelligent enough to do the books. So Weisselberg has all of the books. And if you did any shady dealings, it's in the books. And the person handling the books must, by definition, know about it. So now it is possible, theoretically. I don't know if the universe can even conceive of this theory, that Donald Trump has never broken any law from the 1970s to now. He's just the cleanest man you've ever seen. And so when they asked Weisselberg, he's like, yeah, I mean, there was the mistress with Stormy Daniels and the hush money, but that's all. And then maybe prosecutors will take his word for it. But I find that to be highly unlikely.
It is possibly unlikely, but as of right now, in terms of the cooperation deal, the way it has been described by all the people who are familiar with it is that it is about these particular payments. So Weisselberg could know about all this other stuff, but so far there's no indication that he's cooperating based on all of this other stuff. It's not impossible, I'm just acknowledging that. Look, I think that he probably does know a lot. I certainly think that Donald Trump has committed any number of crimes, but I also think, maybe I'm just being pessimistic or cynical, I suppose, but I don't think that we're operating in the normal laws of the nature of politics aren't operating right now. Like, there are so many crimes that they could reveal that Donald Trump doesn't care that he committed. His defenders don't care that he committed. His defenders in the media, many of his defenders in the House and in the Senate don't care. And so there's lots of things that you can't do in politics that we found out that you can actually do if you're shameless enough.
I completely agree. I'm at this point where I have to see it to believe it. I think that so many wild things have happened over these past almost couple of years, and so many people in power have just rolled over to so many things that I don't, too many people don't care.
I know. You know what I'm hearing from you guys? The Titanic can't be sunk. It's an unsinkable strip. Okay. And what I'm telling you is Weisselberg straight ahead.
Okay. Give you more credit on that one now that you've explained it.
Can I add a little bit to it, just because I'm fair. I'll bolster both arguments. As of this morning, if we're jumping ahead to graphic 13A,
don't leave me over here though.
You're already on my
both
side.
arguments though.
We're very evenly split at this table.
The Manhattan District Attorney's Office is considering pursuing criminal charges against the Trump Organization and 2 senior company officials in connection with those payments, obviously. But officials stress that the office's review of the matter is in its earliest stages and prosecutors have not yet made a decision on whether to proceed. And I will say that this area, we're talking about state prosecutions, state investigations, and potential state charges, of course, gets around some of the supposed protections that the DOJ traditions, based on like one note from 50 years ago, says that he has. We had journalist David K. Johnston on the Damage Report earlier this week, breaking down all the ways this could play out, and then just a day later, this actually happened. So it is not impossible. And I will say that if all they're talking about is Michael Cohen and the payments, and he has gotten immunity, it doesn't make sense that he got immunity to give information about Michael Cohen's law breaking, because although you could give more charges against Michael Cohen, they've already got him on a bunch. So it doesn't seem likely that they would push for that. That makes it seem more likely that they would go for someone higher up the food chain like Donald Trump. So I will admit that. But I still believe that he will be president for at least 22 years.
Okay, first of all, let me acknowledge that John is right, that all the articles only talk about the hush money in regards to Weisselberg and the immunity. I was a little surprised that Cohen gave up and pled guilty so quickly. Because yeah, they got him on the taxi cab stuff. The campaign finance stuff is really important. It's a federal crime, it's a felony, but it would have been hard to prove. But he was like, yep, I did it. It led me to think, what else do they have on him? And if Weisselberg already testified earlier in the year, the answer could be a lot. I was super surprised yesterday, even with all that we know, that David Pecker, who has no ethics whatsoever, runs the National Enquirer, did smear job after smear job against Hillary Clinton, Ted Cruz, etc. His job is to lie. He's a professional liar. He's like, yeah, okay, I did it. Yep, okay, immunity, please, immunity, right? I'm like, Jesus, what do they have on these guys? Yeah. So today, when we find out about Weisselberg, okay, so look, we'll all find out together, but I will tell you this is really important. Nancy Pelosi and the Democrats, earlier in the week, we're talking about like, well, really, is it really a big deal? It's not a priority for us in terms of impeachment. Look, before this week, I was not on the impeachment bandwagon. I think that there were things he could be impeached on, the emoluments clause, the ZTE deal, and the list goes on and on. But it would have been a tough thing to prove. It would have been a tough thing to win politically, and impeachment is a political process, etc. And I definitely don't think the Democrats should run their campaigns on impeachment or Russia or any of that stuff. They should run on the issues. But if you've got every single insider in the Trump organization saying, yes, Donald Trump committed a federal crime, Democrats, for God's sake, wake up. Right. You gotta go right now. So it is like, if you're trying to calculate my electoral chances and how is it gonna affect my political career, this is not the time for that. You want me to show you what it's time for? Give me graphic one here, Jesus, okay?
Is it the tracker?
No, you'll see. Okay, this is what it's time for.
Maybe the tracker's up and I can't see it.
It's so big.
This is what it's time for, okay? You can get it at shoptyt.com. Maybe send one to Nancy Pelosi and Chuck Schumer and all the Republicans. So when you have his chief financial officer, his personal lawyer, his good friend who made up all the stories on his behalf and buried stories and paid for stories on his behalf to bury them, all turning on him saying, yeah, he's guilty, we committed crimes together. That is when you start talking about impeachment.
The most interesting, not most interesting, but just like a funny little piece about all of this is the president suggesting that flipping should be illegal. Because I feel like, I'm wondering, do you know how this works? Because if that happened, the federal penitentiaries in America would be just about empty. And if someone showed him the demographics of who's in there, I feel like he'd take that statement back.
So look, I'm in favor of criminal justice reform. I'm not in favor of making cooperating with law enforcement illegal. It's preposterous.
I mean,
that's Trump's no snitches law.
It's exactly
absolutely how the feds operate, though. It didn't just start with him.
Yeah, no, I mean, it is literally, he's literally tweeting out in so many words, snitches get stitches. Yeah. That's where we're at with the Trump administration.
Well, actually, I want to say something based off of that, because this is something that Cenk and I talked about off camera, but I don't think we've talked about yet. And it's because there are still people who say that Donald Trump hasn't done anything in any area. They don't believe that, obviously they don't believe that there's any evidence of collusion or whatever, but they don't believe that there's any obstruction of justice either. And certainly his defenders are saying that. And I've pointed out multiple cases in which in plain sight he was obstructing justice. But this week we had one of the clearest. And that's because with Paul Manafort pleading guilty to 8 different charges, in the context of still having another trial coming up in about a month, while they have been maybe trying to get Paul Manafort to flip now for literally months, if they're gonna do it, they're now in the strongest position, Mueller and the prosecutors and all that they've been in ever, because he is actually facing a prison sentence right now. So if he is going to flip, now is the time. And so what happened this week? Well, Donald Trump comes out immediately after the trial and says, Paul Manafort, he's a brave man. He didn't flip, he wasn't one of those ones who flipped. The next day in Scotland, Rudy Giuliani says, you know what, Paul Manafort, as soon as this election is over, we're gonna give him a pardon. And then when questioned on that the next day, he says, "Oh, we're just talking about everybody. Anybody can get a pardon, not necessarily him." So what's going on there? The Mueller team, the prosecutors, might be able to get Paul Manafort to cooperate to assist in an investigation. And while that's going on, you have the most obvious public social media witness tampering possible, coming from both Donald Trump, who is one of the principal people being investigated, and his lead lawyer, Rudy Giuliani. If that is not obstruction of justice, I don't know what is. I have a feeling, as little as I might know about the mechanics of obstruction of justice and investigations, Robert Mueller knows a lot more. And I have a feeling he was probably paying attention to both of their activities this week.
Look, there's last two things that I am upset about in this story, potentially. One is if the prosecutors are really just focusing on the hush money and they didn't ask Weisselberg about all of the other finances, that would be the biggest case of prosecutorial negligence I have ever seen. And that's the only thing that could prevent the end of the Trump presidency. Because maybe by some miracle, he could survive the campaign finance law violations and the obstruction of justice and the collusion and all that stuff. And in that case, you guys have a better chance of being right if the prosecutors just refuse to ask about any other financial improprieties. But if they start looking into his business dealings, OVAH, okay, to quote Spike Lee. And the other thing I'm disappointed is that Jules stole my "Snitches Get Stitches."
Put it on a t-shirt, wear it next time, it'll make sense.
Well, then maybe all the MAGA guys will buy it.
I dated a guy a few years ago, but he was like telling a joke, and it was like about his little nephew snitching on him, and he was like, "I told you, snitches get stitches," and his sister jumps in and goes, "No, snitches get out of jail early, so you better start telling."
And then the other sister jumped in and said, "Weisselberg, straight ahead."
And nobody knew what she meant.
Handwriting, meet wall. Okay, next story. Let's do it. Let's keep rolling.
We're not taking a break? Okay.
All right. No, we're on a roll, brother. Okay.
Well, we're on a roll, but unfortunately that does not make for a smooth transition into this. John McCain's family had a fairly somber announcement about the senator's ongoing battle with cancer. Here is a portion of that. Last summer, Senator John McCain shared with Americans the news our family already knew. He had been diagnosed with an aggressive glioblastoma, and the prognosis was serious. In the years since, John has surpassed expectations for his survival, but the progress of disease and the inexorable advance of age render their verdict. With his usual strength of will, he has now chosen to discontinue medical treatment. And if you haven't been following this, Mr. McCain has been undergoing treatment for that cancer since July of last year and has been absent from Washington since last December. Mr. McCain's family has apparently gathered in Arizona, and people close to him say that his death is imminent.
So this is a sad story in a lot of ways, obviously. But I've never seen this in an article before. In Vox, not Fox, Vox, they said when McCain dies, Arizona Governor Doug Ducey, a Republican, will appoint a replacement to serve in the Senate until 2020. Now, it's true, we're all gonna die, so you could write in any article when Cenk Uygur dies, etc. But I've never seen that about a public figure before, so apparently it is obviously imminent. I know this, I don't want people to take this the wrong way, but I hope he can survive until Trump leaves office. That would be awesome. So I don't know what his situation is. I don't know if it's day to day, week to week, month to month. Obviously at this point, they've stopped treatment. And McCain is a complicated character. He is a very interesting part of American history and certainly part of my political lifetime. In fact, I just realized McCain is the very last Republican I ever voted for. I voted for him in the 2000 primaries and then switched over and voted for Gore against Bush in 2000 and haven't voted for a Republican since. And so a lot of people forget he did McCain-Feingold. He was actually for campaign finance reform. So that is an enormous positive for John McCain. Now, and he stood up to Trump at very important times. He even stood up to his own supporters when running against Barack Obama and refused to call him Muslim and said it's not right to say those things about him. And obviously the thing that everyone remembers about him, and should, with the notable exception of Donald Trump, that not only did he suffer torture at the hand of the North Vietnamese when he was captured, but to me the most heroic part of all was when they said, okay, we found out you're the son of a really important admiral in the US Navy, so we're gonna let you go. And he said, no, I will not leave unless you let all of us go. Now, that's the kind of bravery that is unparalleled. And for Donald Trump to say that I prefer people who don't get captured, when he got out of Vietnam with what he called a very strong letter about his bone spurs that are obviously non-existent, it was one of the most grotesque things I've ever seen in politics. But I don't want anybody to get me wrong. So you've got to be fair to John McCain and point out all those great attributes that I just talked about. On the other hand, man, he was a hawk, and he supported so many wars that proved to be completely disastrous. So at the end of the day, I did not agree with him politically, especially as he drove us towards the Iraq War, which was one of the worst mistakes in American foreign policy history, and in his later years seemed to be driving us towards the war with Iran, famously saying once, bomb, bomb, bomb Iran.
Singing it.
And singing it, that's right. So it is a mix. I don't know of a politician in this country that has a more mixed record than John McCain. A lot of people that have a terrible record, some that have a great record, but boy, McCain is as mixed as it gets.
Yeah, I mean, it's politically, there's that. And then personally, it's awful. There's a family right now preparing to lose and say goodbye forever to their dad, their grandpa, their husband. It's sad.
Yeah.
I mean, I think it's worth acknowledging that John McCain kind of represents this old guard of Republicans that still had some integrity and hadn't totally sold out their values for, I don't know, racism and fear and hate, because a lot of what he did, when he stepped in at the last minute for healthcare, is admirable, and I think it's really telling to see what what a Republican does when they don't have to appeal to this kind of odd growing new Republican Party. And so I think it's worth acknowledging that, despite the fact that we don't necessarily agree with Republicans, and that's okay. I think he's one that we can respect in a way that we don't respect sort of this new brand of Republicanism.
I think that's exactly right, and I think Jules draws the exact right distinction, because the older Republicans, and now a lot of them are retired, John Danforth, who, and I disagreed with these guys. John Danforth brought us Clarence Thomas, but he is honest and he is a principled conservative. Alan Simpson, I disagree with him vehemently, and we've had fights on air about he wants to cut Social Security, but he is an honest man and he is principled. He also thinks money in politics is disastrous. Jim Leach from back in the day, et cetera. There was an old school Republicans that you disagreed with, but they were honest actors. The new Republicans are all supplied by donor money, grew up on donor money, and so they have no principles whatsoever. They'll do whatever their donors ask them to do. Now, again, that leads us back to McCain. He definitely has some principles, and some principles I disagreed with vehemently.
Yeah.
But we also have to acknowledge that he's a mix of old and new, because he also voted for every gigantic tax cut for the rich, every gigantic war, and the list goes on.
Yeah.
And then to agree with Brooke, look, when you think about it from a personal level, if it was your family member, how do you spend the last couple of days or weeks? I mean, that is just heartbreaking beyond measure.
Yeah, there was an HBO documentary about him, and obviously to some extent, I mean, they had access to him and his family. It's going to be it's an error on the side of pro him, but it's a lot of interviews with people, and he did really seem to be of an earlier sort of politician that, yes, they still are doing what their donors want, and yes, they still do horrible things. And in the area of war, that's just about, if you're going to be bad in an area of issues, that's just about the worst area that you can be on. But he did seem to actually, at least on some level, care about the concept of America and the concept of what our government was about. It led him to some terrible positions. But I agree with you. You can still, some people would hear you say he has integrity, and they'd say, no, here's a bad thing he did. He doesn't have integrity. Okay, some people, their brand doesn't involve shades of gray. It's all about, this guy's about to die. I can probably get a little bit of acclaim by dunking on him right now. I think that's largely pathetic. I will say in advance, I'm gonna do it when Donald Trump dies. So just prepare for that in a few years. But there are very few people that actually warrant that. Scalia might have been one. I think I tweeted a few things. But when it comes to John McCain, he stood up for refugees largely, far more than most other Republicans. As you said, some campaign finance reform. And he didn't seem to want to see the Republican Party become the party of white supremacy and Islamophobia and homophobia and all of that. And that It's part of being a mixed bag. And everybody has flaws. Everyone in a position of power, literally the politicians you love most, have made horrible decisions in office. And those decisions, because they have power, are consequential for people's lives. So you cannot simply go through life saying, if I can identify a bad thing that someone has done, then I don't have to think critically about anything that they've done.
Yeah, so let me complete the hat trick and agree with all three of you. So guys, it is entirely possible to say that yes, he did oftentimes serve the donors, but at the same time, he actually believed in this country and still had principles. And for the new brand of politicians, it's sometimes hard to say those things.
Yeah.
Because oftentimes they don't have principles. All they have is service of the donors. But John McCain, I would argue, did a lot of terrible things and acted in ways that were not always principled, for sure. At the same time, he wanted to clean up our government. He wanted to get money out of politics. Those are incredibly laudable goals. And at the end of the day, it is near impossible to argue, no matter how much you might dislike his policies or even him, that he wasn't a patriot. Yeah. Just about the only person who could argue that in the country is Donald Trump. Yeah. Yeah.
And by the way, I saw, so Jake Tapper tweeted out a section of an interview he'd done with him about a year ago. And he asked him, he said, hopefully we don't have to worry about this for another 50 years, but if you were to someday have to be remembered, what would you want to be remembered as? And in the span of one paragraph, he said some version of a man who's made many mistakes 4 or 5 times. But he said, but a guy who tried to serve his country.
Yeah, that's a good point.
I mean, I think it's worth looking at this as we don't have to agree with the Republican Party. We have to live with them, and I would rather they be more like John McCain than like Donald Trump.
Yes, for sure. Okay, now we really got to take a break. We have so much more for you guys. The next story, you have to come back for the next story. I don't know where you'd be going, it's the internet anyway. But what do Republicans think about single payer? Fascinating. We'll have that for you when we come back. We hope you're enjoying this free clip from the Young Turks. If you want to get the whole show and more exclusive content while supporting independent media, become a member at tyt.com/join today. In the meantime, enjoy this free segment. All right, back on the Young Turks. We got comments for you guys. YouTube super chat. Perel77 writes in, "Hi Cenk, my name is Matthew. Oh, just Matthew. Yeah. Okay. That's how. That's
the
how
weird
you say
thing is
it
it says Jason. I don't know why he's pronouncing it that way.
Obviously, it's not spelled with an EW at the end. Okay, yeah. I just want to be clear. Okay. And he's likely French. I'm from Montreal, Canada, so it's probably Matthew. Okay.
I'll go
like
with
a
that.
question.
Okay.
Yeah, well, don't worry, he's not watching anymore. So.
Thank you for using YouTube Super Chat and supporting the show. Okay, now that Trump's money man has immunity and knows all the dealings, they're going after Trump's money. I just ask one thing of you when it happens. Elbow from the top rope. Can do. I'm telling you, Edwin, I'm gonna put you on it too. I was talking to Craig in one of the earlier shows. We gotta build a ring in here so I could jump off the top rope. The day we get Trump, the elbow from the sky. Okay, that day is going to be glorious. If you missed the Young Turks on that day, have you really lived?
Yeah.
You really lived.
Yeah, so make sure you're watching in 2024.
Oh my God, that's the saddest thing I've ever heard. Okay, trust me, it's not gonna happen. Believe me. Anyway, go to Twitter here. That boy's hell on Turlitz writes in. Cenk, what's the over/under on Trump resigning via Twitter? Ooh, that's a good one. That's a good one. I actually think that could happen, right?
Yeah.
He would have to actually be forced out of office, and then we would get a tweet the next day, like I
That
quit
he
this.
didn't.
Too good for this.
Yeah, I didn't want it
I
anyway.
didn't want to do this.
Yeah.
Today I'm deciding, right?
Right.
Yeah.
I decided prison was better anyway. But it's okay. I'm going to a very strong prison. Oh, that would be awesome.
That's really good.
Okay. Stomp writes in, last one here. With your app, I was able to become a member. Already love you. Okay. Credit cards are not that common in Germany. Fascinating. I didn't know that. Okay. Guten Tag, by the way. Been catching up with the post game and old school with all the stories, insight, and joy. It's the whole picture. So glad to see TYT thrive. #2strong, #progressives, etc. Well, stop. Thank you. That is a wonderful thing to say. And you guys can all enjoy that too. tyt.com/join and become a member. And I don't know anyone who watches the post games in old school and goes, not interesting.
Right.
So I think that you'll love them. On a recent one, we found out all about Brooke's life, although we're in part one.
We're in part one, right.
Next time we're going to do part 2.
It's a 10-parter.
And
They're going year by year.
Yeah.
Basically.
And I want to remind all of you guys that if ever there was a time to wear this, it is now. So let's look at graphic one more time. ShopTYT.com, which is a sponsor, by the way, of Old School. I love to joke about that.
You were able to land them, huh?
Yeah. It was tough. They're tough over at ShopTYT.com. And by the way, every time I wear these, including yesterday when I wore it, I didn't know about Weisselberg, but what I did know from Cohen was enough, and I wore that yesterday. And every time people are like, yeah.
I like that it could be his hair. It also looks like an orange slug.
Yeah, it works on
I
a lot
believe
of
that is
levels.
what his hair is.
There you go.
All right, what's
Okay,
this?
pretty interesting news here. This week has been full of incredibly positive polling having to do with Medicare for All, and we're going to close out a week with perhaps the most amazing, fascinating results of all. And this comes from a new Reuters Ipsos poll, found that 51.9% of Republicans would embrace a Medicare for All policy. It also, 84.5% of Democrats is obviously good. But that is a majority of Republicans. And I feel like nobody is actually prepared for that sort of thing. And again, as we always say when these sorts of polls come out, this is before the case has even really been made. I mean, you've had a few politicians, obviously during the last primary, you had Bernie Sanders, and you're gonna see a lot more of it. But most people still have not heard anything other than fear-mongering and propaganda coming from places like Fox News and Breitbart.
And CNN, by the way.
Oh, of course, yes. And look, Jake Tapper obviously did his as much as he could over the past week. Now, at the same time, understand that while all this polling is going on, 2/3 of Democratic nominees across 41 battleground districts for US House seats also want to expand the government's role in healthcare. About a dozen support Medicare for All or a single payer system. But what's most interesting was actually noticed by Jeff Stein of the Washington Post, who said that if that Reuters poll is correct, then there's a higher percentage of GOP voters that support Medicare for All than Democratic senators.
Oh, that's devastating.
Yeah.
So, but great credit to Jeff Stein because he nailed it. That's exactly right, and that tells you everything you need to know about what's wrong with the system and what I call the establishment. A lot of people call the establishment. And so, what is that? That's not only the Republican Party, but it's also the Democratic establishment and a lot of mainstream news. Look, here we do nuance. It's not a black and white world. So Jeff Stein from the Washington Post makes a great point. That's part of mainstream media. CNN has had some positive reports recently. We've given them credit for that. On Medicare for All, they've been terrible. And it's not because they're bad people. It's because groupthink in the establishment is no way, not practical, gonna cost too much. But wait a minute, we showed you over and over again, it actually saves money. Not only that, look at how obvious it is. The rest of the developed world all has single payer. They all pay less than us. Countries like Canada pay half of what we pay for healthcare, half. Our system is not practical. Our system is too expensive. And yet, almost everyone on cable news, everyone in the Republican Party in terms of official politicians, and unfortunately, a huge chunk of the Democratic Party goes, no, we don't care what the American people have to say. In fact, we'll pretend they're against it, even though every poll shows they are. This one, it used to be at 60%. It's now at 70% of Americans saying, that's it, we want Medicare for all. And even in Mark Meadows' district, he's the leader of the Freedom Caucus, the most conservative faction there is. They went and polled there. People are like, yeah, no, Republicans are like, yep, interested in Medicare for all.
Yeah.
I'll quote one guy. He said about the government and healthcare, he said, either leave me alone 100% or pay it for 100%. And what I hear from every candidate that we talk to on Rebel headquarters is, whether they're talking to Democrats, Republicans, or independents, when they go door knocking or when they make phone calls, they're all like, we're drowning in this healthcare bills. It's killing us literally, and we can't afford it. We can't afford the regular payments, and God help us if we get sick. We've terrorized our own country because no one has any kind of security when it comes to health.
Yeah.
And they're tired of it. And I'll go even further. That's it. It's time to get past Obamacare. So Obamacare was better than the old horrible system, horrible, right? But it left private insurance in charge and it did not control costs. And those costs are now killing us. And so those costs are now allowing Republicans to say, oh, you see that the liberal position gave you more costs. Hell no, Medicare for all would save us a ton of money. It's time to go right now. And if the folks on cable news, et cetera, and in Washington wonder why people don't like them and don't trust them, well, when you frame things in a way that is the exact opposite of what the American people want, that's why they don't trust you. It's not that complicated.
Yeah.
Voters have for so long allowed politicians to get away with making decisions that go against not only their best interests, but what they want and what they say they want. They've just let them get away with that. Like, oh, it's okay, I'm still gonna vote for him because this is who we voted for before. And a good thing that has come out of the Trump era is that's changing. It's happening. People are making decisions based on what politician will do what they're asking them to do and not just get all these votes and then, get in office and do just what works best for them. And things like this, and this is not the only issue, but things like this matter, as they're sitting with their very well taken care of health care.
Real quick point on that. Trump is, a lot of the establishment thinks Trump was the end of populism, that he's a populist. Now we all know he's a fake populist, and that once we get him out of office, it'll be over, right? No, he's the beginning of populism. It just started in the wrong direction. We're gonna straighten it out. And you know what populism is? At the end of the day, it is doing what the popular will is. There's another word for that, it's called democracy.
I don't trust it.
Yeah.
Fair.
Why don't we take another break? So we've gone a little bit far into this hour. But when we come back, we've got an amazing story, a find from the weeks leading up to the last election that now, with what we know from this past week, takes on a whole new meaning.
All right, we'll be right back.